A Trip into the Darkness. Chapter 14. Mallory awoke from her slumber and looked around the empty room. Part of her wanted to get up, but the question of, "What's the point?" weighed heavy on her psyche. She had no annoying alarm clock chasing her from her restful night's sleep, no idea if it was day or night, nothing to do but stumble around the concrete box in a drug-induced haze and nibble on food that she was brought while she waited for her master to come back and play with her. He truly had turned her into his own personalized pet. That thought disgusted her. She was no longer a human with a dignity in life. No, instead she might as well be a rat living in the god-forsaken box. After her last encounter with Troy, he must have told her to go to sleep because when she awoke, her room was cleaned and put back in order. New clothes and towels had been delivered and a different book awaited her. Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. She assumed it was another book from Troy's mother's collection because it too was leather-bound and felt old. She had read it a couple of times in the past, so it was easier to read with her mind being a jumbled mess thanks to the opioids. That was days ago. Hulk had made his appearance 3 more times now, and she had started counting her days by his presence. The first time he had come into her prison, she had tried talking to him, only for him to shove her up against the wall and stick her with the needle. The next 2 times she tried again. She asked him his name, the first time he barged into her room, and he halted his advance when she told him that she would call him Hulk now, since she didn't answer her. Of course he didn't say anything about that, just stabbed her in the neck and stormed out of the room. The third time she had greeted him with, "Hey, Hulk. So, are you a born vampire, or did he use sex and blood against you too?" She was shocked when he responded with, "I'm definitely not gay," before looking her up and down and stabbing her. His response had made little sense to her at the time. While he held her shoulder, injecting her with the drugs, his touch lingered for seconds longer than necessary. She had felt herself pulling at his energy, and he must have as well. His was nothing like Troy's. When Troy was around her, it felt like waves from the ocean, bringing her life and sunshine. Hulk was more like walking outside without a jacket in the middle of a snowstorm. Still full of energy, but not as pleasurable. With a sigh, Mallory stood from the bed to pace the room. She had only a couple of chapters left with Gone in the Wind, and she was trying to save it. She wished he would have brought her lots of books to entertain herself with. Granted, after Hulk made his daily appearance, she was not able to read for a while, but she figured she probably still had a couple of hours before that. As she moved around her room, her mind kept wandering back to Troy. What was he doing now? Why didn't he visit her daily? She had loved to have his blood every day, and his company was better than the constant nothingness that was her current existence. Then again, sharing his blood would lead to other things. A slight growl ripped out of her lips with that thought. Bastard. When the cubby door opened and food and water appeared on the tray, she realized she was not hungry at all for food. She needed blood. Her throat was tight and her mouth hurt. The last time Troy had visited her, he had said it had been 5 days. That meant she was likely had another solid day or maybe 2 until he decided to reappear. That thought finally brought tears to her eyes. It dawned on her then that she hadn't truly cried since she'd been locked in this room. As tears rolled down her face, she put her back against the wall and sank to the floor. It was over. This was her life now, to be locked away and treated like nothing more than a rat in a terrarium, fiend for its owner's attention. She was lonely, bored, and in need of blood and companionship. Perhaps it wasn't companionship, but the energy that she needed. Just someone to give her life force, so she didn't feel like an empty husk. With that thought, she started sobbing. Thoughts of her brother and her best friend Eddie rolled through her mind and tore at the hole in her heart. She tried so hard not to think about either of them because she knew it would cause her to lose it. Considering she was already having a meltdown, she might as well mourn their loss. It felt like a fatality because in her heart she knew she'd never get to see them again, never get to run again or have shots of vodka again, never smoke a cigarette that she bunned off some random guy or hook up with someone for the first time. She would never get a chance to publish any of her old work or have the time or resources to write new work to publish. Nope, to the rest of the world, Mallory Renee Vander was pretty much dead. It was a small eternity that she sat there on the floor sobbing and crying. When her tears finally dried, she simply sat there and stared at the door. She had no energy to get up and pace, even though her hunger for blood told her to be on the defense. No energy or motivation to get up and grab that book to continue reading. No spirit to even think at this point. Thinking equated to pain, and she hated the pain. She was full of anguish and despair. When the door finally opened and Hulk walked in, Mallory couldn't help the small moan that escaped her lips. He smelled so good. She could hear his blood beating through his veins and wanted desperately to sink her teeth into his thick flesh. He didn't rush her like normal, and instead stood at the door for a minute. Mallory shifted on the floor when she felt his sexual energy hit her. It made her uncomfortable and also achy because she wanted and needed more of it. "It's been a long time since Mr. Denhart has been in here to care for you," Hulk stated as he continued to stand by the door. "It's only been a few days," Mallory rasped. It was the first time she had heard Troy's last name. Out of all the time they'd spent together, she had never thought to ask it, and he had never given it to her willingly. If he hadn't kidnapped her and was as secretive and distant in real life, Troy would have been her ideal man, distant and aloof. "If you were my pet, I would feed you every day," he responded as he began making his way towards her. Mallory shot to her feet as fear and excitement coursed through her. "Will you feed me now? Please? I hurt so much and I need it. I also need to be touched." It was a risky act, asking Troy's guard to step out of order like this, but maybe he would let his defense down just long enough for her to grab that needle and inject him to escape. "Is that what you need, princess? Me, a real man, to grab you and offer you my essence?" Hulk asked as he stopped in front of her. She wanted to scoff that he was far from a real man, but she could see the needle in his hand, and her heart was beating so fast. Clenching her fists to keep her hands from shaking, she said, "Yes, it's what I need. Please, I'll do anything." She whispered back and waited to see what he would do. She could feel his lust rolling off him in waves. "All right, take it." He lifted his big head back, exposing his meaty neck to her. Mallory licked her lips as the thrill of what she was about to do hit. Panting, she moved towards him and placed her hands on his chest before going up on her tiptoes to reach his lower throat with her mouth. Slowly sinking her aching teeth into his flesh, she heard him moan and buck his hips towards her as she pulled not only on his blood but his energy. Hulk's blood hit her stomach and made her feel heady. It wasn't as rich and strong as Troy's, but it was still fulfilling. Carefully, so she wouldn't startle him, Mallory moved her hand down his chest, and one hand slipped in front of his pants to grab his penis. Once it was in her hand, she began stroking him while he bucked into her eagerly. With the speed of a snake, Mallory reached out with her other hand and shoved Hulk's hand with the needle into his thigh and pressed down the plunger. Before she could get away and dart to the other side of the room, she heard him cuss loudly and felt him grab at her hair. Mallory slashed her claws at his face, and his blood spewed from the cuts. Hulk moaned loudly and started to sway on his feet. "You fucking bitch!" he spat as he released her hair and sank to the floor. Mallory jumped over him and skidded to the other side of the room. They must have been giving her a large dosage of opioids because Hulk was already out and his breathing shallow. "Hot damn," she mumbled in shock. She could not believe what just happened. Not in her wildest dreams would she have thought she could trick that big guy into falling for that. She wanted to laugh, but knew that she had to escape this room and whatever building he had her locked in. She took a deep breath and quickly glanced down at her clothes. She was wearing another pair of black yoga pants and a red cami top with a sheer red cover. She didn't have any shoes on, but that didn't matter at this point. All that mattered right now was escaping this concrete box and never returning. Walking over to Hulk, she kicked him to make sure he was really out. When no response came, she decided she would try her luck and bent down to check his pockets. In his front pants pocket, she found a half pack of Camel cigarettes and a butane lighter. She grabbed both and stuck them in the side pockets of her sheer cover. Next, she looked in his other pockets and found a set of car keys. He didn't have anything else on him, so the next course of action was dragging his huge body across the room so she could use the thumb scanner. She prepared herself, then grabbed his arm and heaved. Mallory was shocked when she barely struggled to pull him across the room to the door. She was incredibly stronger than she remembered being. Once at the door, she risked one last look around the room and took a deep breath. Feyre, be with me and help me finish busting out of this hellhole, she asked the goddess before lifting his arm and putting his thumb on the scanner. A second later, a click chimed through the room. Shoving Hulk away from her, she slowly opened the door and glanced out into an open and dark hallway. She placed a foot outside of the concrete box and was flooded with emotions. It was happening. She was finally leaving her prison, and she wasn't dead. Stop it, she told herself. She wasn't freed yet. She was simply the rat leaving its holding cell to maneuver down the maze. With slow steps, she moved down the dimly lit hallway. The floors looked to be made of light wood, and the walls were as gray as they were in her cell. Every few steps, there was a small light overhead. She wondered if they were merely turned on dim or if they were always like this. She passed a couple of doors but didn't stop at them. She had a feeling that she was somehow underground, and she needed to find a way up. After a few minutes of slow walking, the hallway opened to a huge game room of sorts. There was a plush, huge red rug in the middle of the room, and what appeared to be a bar at one end of the room. There was also a pool table and a couple of catchers scattered about. Fucking bastard, she thought as she glanced around the cozy space. He had this area just a mere 20 or so feet away from her and still forced her to live in that box. This room was dimly lit, and off to the far side she spied another hallway. Taking a deep breath, she smelled food coming from that direction, and she wondered if there was a kitchen of sorts tucked back there. In front of her, there was a flight of stairs leading up. Without any hesitation, she decided that's the way she needed to go. She tried to slow her pace as she flew across the game room to the staircase. She looked up them and saw another door at top. Creeping up the wooden stairs, she found herself on the landing. With a shaking hand, Mallory reached out and placed her fingers on the cold knob and slowly twisted. Relief flooded her when the handle turned without any resistance. Peeking through the open crack, she looked to see if anyone was on the other side and listened with all her might. She didn't hear anything. What she found on the other side of the door was a brightly lit room that made her eyes water. Opening the door just enough so she had a better view, she found a magnificent foyer that left her in awe. The floors looked to be made from light and colorful granite, and giant windows were taking up an entire wall far off to one side. The walls were pristine white and had golden and wooden trim. There were a few larger-than-life paintings on the wall to her left and a piano tucked in one corner. Slipping out of the basement door, Mallory stood there for a couple of seconds trying to take it all in. Spotting a door with windows up ahead, she knew it would take her outside and she wanted to run to it, but something told her not to, and she was held back. Confusion struck as she glanced around the giant room again. Off to the back of the room, two massive staircases were leading up, and in between them, a large hallway led further into the house. She did not want to go deeper into the house. She needed to get out. She went to take a step towards the front door again, but that nagging feeling intensified, and she could have sworn she heard something tell her no. Okay, she told herself, and carefully moved closer to the first stairwell. She thought about following the hallway in between the stairs, but that nagging feeling was pulling her upward. She found it counterproductive to go higher up in the house when the desired outcome was to get outside, but Mallory decided to listen to her intuition. Walking up the light granite stairs, she touched the golden banister and found it cold. She briefly wondered if it was real gold, but dismissed that thought. What kind of crazy person would design their home with real gold accents? An image of Troy flashed through her mind, but she could not see him caring about flaunting his wealth like this. He liked power and control, yes, but he didn't strike her as the being that was overly flashy. Then again, who was she to assume anything about him? Hell, it wasn't even till today that she learned his last name. The only thing she knew for certain was the fact that he was a psychopath who got off on abusing her. When Mallory reached the top of the stairs, she was greeted with another extravagant room filled with paintings that looked like they cost a small fortune, along with other items and decor. Looking around, she spied windows to the right and made her way over to them. Glancing out, she saw a beautiful landscape, complete with a wraparound driveway and a pond in the middle of it. In front of the mansion, there was also a gorgeous fountain in the pond, spitting out clear blue water. Professionally groomed trees, along with statues, were scattered about the area, and farther off in the distance, she could see iron gates. Looking closer at the front of the house, she found a raised patio with stairs leading up to the entrance. She figured that was the area where the door was, which she had almost ran through. In front of the house, and standing on the patio, she spied at least six security guards who reminded her of Hulk standing guard. Fuck me, Mallory thought as she looked at the monkeys in suits in front of the house. Thank the goddess she hadn't tried shooting out the door, or her happy ass would have been toast. She moved to the window further down the hall and looked back outside. Under the window, and tucked closer to the house, she saw a row of vehicles. She wondered if one of them belonged to Hulk. They were all black, and a couple of them were SUVs. She could see him driving an SUV. He would need something big considering his massive size. Reaching to her front pocket, she pulled out his keys and thought about pressing the button to see if one of the cars would honk, but that nagging feeling stopped her. Pursing her lips, she had a good feeling that one of those vehicles had to work with the keys in her hand. Now she just had to figure out how to get down there without being seen or caught. Mallory's skin started to itch and her mouth started throbbing slightly. Someone must be close because she could smell their blood. Glancing around the open area, she saw nowhere to hide. Suddenly, there was a slight tug on her hand, and she glanced around. There were doors further into the room on the left of the area. Following her intuition, she shot over to the first door and felt fear go through her, so she moved down to the third door and opened it. Slipping into the room, she found it was an office with 2 computer monitors set up on a mahogany desk. His scent hit her hard and her stomach clenched. This was a room Troy had spent a lot of time in. She looked around as her anxiety started to ease. She was safe for now, something seemed to whisper to her. There was a massive bookcase lining the back part of the wall, and a few lamps and little tables placed periodically. There was only one chair in the room, and it was sitting behind the desk. It felt like a room that he never allowed others within. Mallory made her way over to the chair and sat down. The computer monitors were turned off and the desk was clean, without any pictures or clutter. She wasn't surprised that he wasn't a sentimental kind of monster. Underneath the desk, she found what appeared to be the exact backpack she had tried to grab the day Troy kidnapped her from her apartment. What the hell? She thought as she reached down and opened it. Inside, she found some of her old clothes stuffed within, a few of her old journals, and other little items from her house. Anger hit her. How dare he take my stuff? She went to grab the bag so she could bring it with her, but that nagging feeling told her to leave it. So instead, she pulled out her black hoodie and slipped it on. She also found a pair of dirty old blue jeans with rips in the knees. She quickly pulled off the black yoga pants and slipped on her ripped pants. With her old clothes on, she felt more like herself than she had since the moment she got to this place. Mallory wished that he would have been nice enough to have brought her a pair of shoes as well, but there was no such luck. Looked like she was staying barefoot for the time. Putting Hulk's keys in the jeans pocket, she was fixing to stand up when that strange feeling seemed to tell her to check the drawers. She turned back to the desk and began opening drawers. The first 2 had nothing of interest to her, just papers with numbers and names on them. She also found a few pencils and pens, along with a stapler and some sticky notes. When she opened the third drawer, her heart stopped. Sitting on top of more papers rested her cell phone. Reaching in, she picked it up and pressed the power button, but it was dead. Cradling the dead phone to her chest, tears welled up in her eyes as she realized what this meant. Without her phone, Troy wouldn't be able to trace the numbers within. This meant her brother should be safe from his clutches. An internal tug pulled at Mallory while she stared off in the dark room. It wanted her to leave, but she felt frozen as she stared back at as she fought back the bombardment of emotions. She could disappear, and hopefully Troy would never find Lance. Mallory didn't post on social media, and she was certain that after she and Lance had their big fight right before she moved out, that she had deleted him from everything. She had even been so petty as to go through her account and delete the few pictures she had posted of them together and block him. Once she was settled in Toledo, she had wanted to add him back, but never did because she didn't want to be the one to make the first move in fixing the relationship. So, even after they started talking again on the phone and occasionally visiting each other, it was still like they were strangers to the rest of the world. Mallory had never been so happy in her life to have a broken relationship with her brother.